I'm Lauren Alvarez. Absolutely love teaching these classes. And we are doing a class tonight on setting healthy boundaries with the goal, really referring to Mel Robbins' book, The Let Them Theory. I kind of came across, literally, I came across her book on some Facebook Reels and thought, I need to read that. That sounds, all of her little podcast things would just catch my attention. And the general gist of Let Them Theory is let them, so we give other people the freedom to be who they are without me thinking I have to control them. And then let me. I'm going to focus on my own responses, my own actions, because that's all I have control over. And the beautiful thing is, the more you let other people live their lives, better your life gets because I'm focusing on what I actually have control over. So this is Mel Robbins. She's the actual author of the book. And I wanted you to watch this video, and we're actually re-recording this. So I want you to watch this video, even if you've already seen it, that she's just kind of laying the groundwork for just a different way of looking at my interactions with others, what I have control over, what I don't have control over. As we gradually start to reset the filters, the inner voice that we have in our head, that's where the freedom comes from. So here we go on Mel Robbins.
You train people how to treat you. When you stay silent, when you let their behavior pass, when you don't draw boundaries for yourself, when you keep showing up and allowing people to do the same thing, you are allowing it. So boundaries come in when you say to somebody, you can do this, but not that. Boundaries are about you defining what you'll tolerate, and it's also about the way in which the other person needs to behave with you. And so one of the most important things about boundaries, after you figure out what they are for yourself, is you have to express them to the other person very clearly. You got to communicate them to other people, otherwise they're going to keep crossing the line. They're going to keep stepping on the issues. They're going to not understand why you won't call them back or why you won't come over. You want to talk about you. The second that you start pointing the finger and saying, you're doing this and you're doing that and you need to change, you will put them on the defensive. The second that you talk about your feelings, hey, I want to talk to you because I notice that I'm starting to distance myself from you. I notice that we're not as close anymore. And I notice that there are things that happen in our friendship that make me feel really uncomfortable. And here's what's happening for me. And then have 3 specific examples. When this happened, I felt this way. When this happened, I felt this way. When this happened, I felt this way. And then here's what you're going to say. And this is a trick. This is a form of manipulation. You ready? You're going to go, is there something that I've done or something that's going on with you that I don't know about that is creating this dynamic? Now, did you notice what I didn't do? I didn't point the finger and I didn't say you're to blame. I asked a question that was self-reflective. Because 9 times out of 10, what you're going to find out is there's something horrible going on with them, or that they had no idea how you were feeling because you never communicated it. And that's why the behavior has continued. You can't change somebody, but you do train them how to treat you.
And I say that all the time. I teach a lot of parenting classes, and I say that all the time. You know, some people say, well, my kids won't listen until I yell at them. Well, and I always say, well, you've trained them without realizing it. You've trained them to not listen to you until your voice gets to that volume. If you actually followed through with a consequence or with something the first time you say it, and they don't do what they said that they were going to do, then have a consequence. I don't have to keep raising my voice and yelling. Sometimes without realizing it, we are training people to take advantage of us. And that's a really difficult thing to acknowledge, because really what we want to do is we want to stay in the mode where I can blame other people for the frustrating things in my life. It takes a lot more courage to say, all right, I'm going to look at what I actually have control of in my life and make some necessary changes. Because sometimes when we do finally let go of that, everyone else is to blame, it's going to lead to some really honest self-reflection. And, you know, we always are changing and growing and need to change and grow. So we'll probably identify some areas in ourselves that we've been able to just stay comfortable blaming on others. There is a science behind boundaries. So, research shows that 7 out of 10 people live in chronic stress from trying to control others. And here's why: you're spending all this energy, all this effort, all this time, and you're not getting results because we really can't control others. I'm not getting what I want. And then my brain's constantly releasing, adrenaline and cortisol and all the stress hormones and all those kinds of things. So my attempting to control others literally rewires my brain to be in a negative state. The human brain simply cannot control another person's actions. I can only control my own. And when I continue to attempt to manage others, not only do I get frustrated because I don't get the results that I want, but it also gets resistance and resentment, and it has a negative impact on my relationships. And the weird thing is, if I spend all my energy even trying to control someone else or change their behavior for the better for them, it winds up destroying my relationship with them, even when I'm really trying to help. Because reality, I can't change someone. They won't change until they're ready. So be thinking about that. If you are feeling like maybe some of your chronic stress, it could be from we are stuck in this rut of thinking that we are responsible for managing other people's behavior. But the reality is also control is a basic human need. I mean, some core human needs: a need for belonging, a need for power and control in our own lives to make decisions for ourselves, a need for things to be fair, and a need to be able to take a step back when we're feeling overwhelmed. Those are all core human needs. How we get those needs met, we can do that in a positive or negative way. Control is a human need. But if I'm trying to get my real okay need, perfectly reasonable need for control, but I'm trying to get that met by controlling someone else, that's not going to work. Adults can only control their own actions. When I put pressure on other people to change and do what I want or control them, it's going to cause a lot of pushback. And it's really hard to realize that people only change when they choose to. And a lot of times, if we are maybe struggle with being a little codependent, feeling like, oh, if I just said this one more thing, or if I just, behaved in this way, maybe that would make this person change. People only change when they choose to. And it's a hard thing to realize. Now, because this new way of thinking is going to create some interesting changes, sometimes when we start to make these decisions and realize I can only control myself, it often feels terrible in the moment. The right decision can feel terrible in the moment. What that's evidence of is you're not a jerk. You literally do care about how this boundary might be impacting someone else. It really is hard for you to see people suffering as the result of a very necessary and healthy boundary that you set. So that right decision might feel bad in the moment, but don't let how you feel in the moment change the fact that you need to set that boundary or behave in that way. Because here's some truths. These are 5 truths about these tough decisions. The right decision can feel terrible because we're humans and we're caring, and we really don't want other people to feel bad or have a negative reaction. But others' emotions are not your responsibility. They're not. That's their responsibility. Another person can't control the boundary that I set for them. But how they choose to react to that, that actually is their choice. It's not my responsibility. I cannot simultaneously manage the boundary and also be responsible for people's feelings about that boundary. Those two things can't coexist. Short-term pain often prevents long-term suffering. Sometimes as we grow and learn and get healthy, sometimes that might cause a rupture in some relationships because people like things to always be the way they are. I remember in grad school, I was in a family systems theory class for my counseling degree, and he talked about systems theory, how systems, even if they're dysfunctional systems, the ship is used to floating this way in the water and being driven in this way, and the sails are this way. This is what I'm used to do. When we come and try to make a change in that system, even if it's a really healthy, necessary change, you've probably heard the term rock the boat. So a lot of times when you rock the boat, what happens? You create waves. It's a little uncomfortable. People get a little dizzy. Someone might get seasick because we're rocking the boat. Eventually, that boat will settle if we can endure the rocking period. That boat will settle into a new, healthier, better normal. But just because we're feeling uncomfortable during the rocking of the boat doesn't mean that we shouldn't have rocked the boat. Other people are going to feel uncomfortable if we rock the boat and make some changes. But that short-term pain can prevent long-term suffering. And it might mean that sometimes we have to stop certain relationships. And because while that's painful now, that prevents a lot of long-term suffering. You cannot control other people's reactions. You can't. And you're nice because you really want people to feel good about this. That's just proof you're not a jerk. But I can't control their reactions. I'm not responsible for their reactions. And your peace matters most. I can't simultaneously maintain my peace and assume responsibility for someone else to be at peace. Because again, their emotions are not my responsibility. Their reactions are not within my control. They have to find peace on their own sometimes. Now, these core truths in her book, Let Them Theory, really hit me hard. If we actually really apply these truths and think about them and chew on them, and how is this working in my life or not working in my life, this can completely change our inner thinking. So we have a lot of stuff that's dumped into our brain from our families of origin, from society, from our life experiences and interactions with others, and things that we read that may or may not be healthy or whatever. So we've accumulated a lot of information along the way. And a lot of times we transfer those into core beliefs. That's what great counseling does, is it uncovers some of those dysfunctional core truths to try to replace them with good, true, healthy core truths. These are healthy core truths. Here's 4 important truths about others. Number 1, you cannot control them. You simply can't. They will have opinions. And maybe their opinion about you is not what you would like it to be. They're going to have opinions about stuff. They make their own choices. Their behavior is their behavior. Now, I'm not saying that the quality of my interactions with someone, it's just, well, that's your problem. That's your deal. There are things I can do in my relationships that create an environment that might make it easier or safer to connect. But ultimately, if the other person doesn't choose to connect in a safe way, I mean, I can't do that. I can influence an environment. I can't control the environment. Their behavior is their behavior. Another thing, 4 key truths about you. You control your response. When we use these phrases like, well, you made me angry. Nope, I chose to get angry at that response. Now, I might have some dysfunctional thinking within me that, influences me to react in that way, but I control my response and I need to take ownership for that. We are also human and we're going to make mistakes. So we can also acknowledge when we have not chosen a good response. Your choices matter most. What you do, not other people's choices, your choices. Your power is internal. You give away so much power when we let other people control us, or we're constantly on this hamster wheel of trying to control others. I have so much power in my life that I can do and make changes. There was a book I read when I was going through a really, really difficult time in my first marriage. And it actually made me mad when I read it. And it was called the 51% principle, that in any situation, you have 51% control. Now, again, that other person could be doing some pretty awful things with their 50% or their 49%. I choose my reactions to that. I choose what I will tolerate. I choose what I believe about myself as a result of someone's actions. There are situations where could even be a life and death situation where a lot of choice is taken out of your hands. There's another great book I read, What's So Amazing About Grace? And it really talked about how when people were able to fully forgive in situations that were completely out of their control, such as, the Nazi concentration camps. It followed people who were bitter and held on to that resentment, which they had every right to be resentful for being treated that way, versus other people who had the same horrific, unfair experience, but chose to respond in a different way, chose to pick up what they could control, which was how do I step towards my future, and let go of what they couldn't control, which was how could this thing have happened to me. They had beautiful, rich, amazing lives. Same experience, their choices on how to respond to that experience. That's a lot of internal power that we give away. Your peace is priority. I cannot simultaneously be responsible for someone else's peace. Your peace is your priority. And here's some things about life. Change is constant. One of the things that shocked me when I was reading the book, it said 50% of people will completely change their friend groups every 7 years. And I'm like, as I look at my life, I'm like, yeah, I've gone through some big life changes. I've had friends that I thought would be my best buddies forever that were just kind of acquaintances now. I've made new friends, so change is constant. We are going to continue to age. Our children are going to continue to grow. Change is constant. That is a part of life. Growth requires acceptance of a lot of things. So when some of those changes are difficult, when I can accept the things I cannot change, have the wisdom to change the things courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. These are things that acceptance is a really empowering thing. And that's what leads to growth, even in the worst of circumstances. Freedom comes from letting go. Oh, I still remember when my first marriage ended. I spent so much time like, what's he doing? And what's happening when the boys are over at his house? And I was so worried about what was going on over there, over there, that by the time the boys would be with me, I had no energy left. And then I was using how angry I was with him, legitimately angry for a lot of things. Then somehow he was my scapegoat work. Well, if he had just been this way, I wouldn't be so overwhelmed right now. If he had just done this better, I would be able to keep up with the laundry. I mean, he was blamed for everything in my mind. When I finally let go of the fact that I can't control about what's going on over there, it's not my job, but I can control my home environment, my interaction with the kids, how I choose to communicate as a co-parent, how I choose to invest in my relationship with the children when they are with me. When I let that go, not a single logistical thing changed in my life, and I felt so much lighter. Freedom comes from letting go, and power lies in choices. Sometimes it takes us a little while to figure out what choices to make, but there is power in making choices, right? These are core truths. As we let some of these things really sink into us, and it can change our internal filter. What's interesting is life experiences filtered through the, oh, I can't control them. Well, now all of a sudden, I don't have all the frustration and all the, agony and the stress that I used to have when I thought somehow if I did something, I could control them. These changes in our filters make a huge difference for us. Now, we do not live alone and isolated on the planet. Some of us would prefer to be a hermit and live up at a cabin in the mountains, but we are going to interact with others. So there's a lot of different power dynamics in relationships. So you might be in some relationships where you feel really inferior, or you've been so used to giving away your power or relinquishing your control for so long, or experiencing a lot of insecurity. That could be where you're at in a relationship. Or you might be really get to the point where you're achieving balance. You're maintaining your autonomy, where someone else is not responsible for making me happy. I'm responsible for my own happiness and my peace. I don't have to require them to do that for me. I can be content, even if, I would like for some things to change. I can still be content, maintaining that autonomy. And guess what? That creates authentic connections, authentic, vulnerable, I don't have to pretend connections. So for you to kind of think about this, think about where you're at in some of your more frustrating relationships. Think about what might be the cause of some of your more rich, enriching, and safe relationships. Because there's a lot of power in just changing our filters. We might feel inferior. What if we changed our internal dialogue to what we thought about ourselves and it wasn't through a lens of comparison? There's another class that we've done for Oklahoma Family Network. It's on their YouTube channel, recorded, and it was mindful self-compassion, like completely changing the way I think about myself, where when I make a mistake, I can respond to myself like I would a friend going through a rough time. There's so much of our inferiority or these moments where we're giving away our power. It's because our thinking is we've come to believe things that aren't true about ourselves or about, what we're worth and whether or not we're worthy of love. Let's change some of those messages. Some of that comes through good boundaries. All right. So now Mel Robbins, in one of her podcasts, she's just going to kind of lay out what is a boundary and why do we need them and what might be some evidence that you are struggling with boundaries. All right. So let's watch our next one.
You have no idea how much time and energy you are wasting
Yeah.
on things that either don't matter or that you will never be able to control. If you feel tired or overwhelmed or you feel like you're last on your list or you're just not as happy as you would like to be in your life, I'm going to tell you right now, the problem isn't really you. The problem is you're unknowingly giving so much power to other people, and that's what's draining you. And that's why you have no time. Mm-hmm. And one of the enormous benefits of learning how to use the let them theory, both in relationships and in your day-to-day life, is it's the ultimate boundary between you and the world, because you get to choose when you say let them, what actually impacts you and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. It's empowering. So let's dig in a little deeper to this let them theory. And I will say I have subscribed to Mel Robbins' podcast, so she pops up frequently when I take some time to go through some social media. I mean, she just has so many good nuggets. I just love the things she said, and it just makes me think. And to have that kind of absorbing new, healthy, accurate information, helps start to unravel some of those other key messages that I've absorbed over the years. And, I've learned to give myself a break too. I can't change completely how I am with boundaries overnight. I mean, I've had over 50 years, I'm in my 50s, I've had over 50 years of this is how I interact with others. So sometimes if I'm still maintaining a dysfunctional habit, it might take, some time to undo that. For every year you've been doing something, it might take a month for some change. So, as we're talking about and learning these principles tonight, don't beat yourself up and be like, oh, well, I should know better. Why should you know better? Well, you did the best you knew how to do with the tools in your toolbox. Let's add a few tools. Now, here are some common challenges when we're trying to set a boundary or worried about setting a boundary. First off, we are afraid of other people's opinions. And I don't know if you remember those 4 core truths about others. They will have opinions. Their opinions are their opinions. If I choose to give them power, and interpret that their opinion of me is actual truth, I've given away my power. We're afraid of other people's opinions. We are afraid of the emotional reactions from others. Because again, other people, their emotions are their emotions. They choose their responses. So sometimes can be scary, especially in a situation maybe where we've been made to feel unsafe. Chronic comparison. So if we are constantly in this dysfunctional way of I'm comparing myself to others and this and this and that over everything, that'll be a difficult place to be in. If we have a lot of rescue attempts where we kind of like we feel bad for them and we don't want them to suffer, so we want to swoop in and kind of help them or rescue them from their own choices, rescue them from their own behavior, that can get in the way of setting good, healthy boundaries. And if we've developed a lot of people-pleasing behaviors. I actually years ago did a work through a book and was in a small group, 12 steps for codependency. So we've heard of 12 steps for alcoholics and 12 steps for addiction. There was a 12 steps for codependency. And here I thought I was this super nice and understanding person. I was so codependent, it wasn't even funny. I was so busy pleasing others and making sure everyone else was okay. I thought that's what a nice, kind human did. I didn't realize how dysfunctional that was and actually how much I was getting in the way of other people experiencing the natural consequences of their choices. And it was described to me that a lot of times someone who's codependent, the other person is the rock, they're not changing, and we're the water. We just kind of flow around them and, try to make things smooth and all that. And, that leaves us constantly frustrated. So I love the quote. All the quotes in here are from the book, the Let Them Theory book. The truth is, other people's opinions of you are none of your business. Like, I don't have to know what they think of me. That is their business. They're entitled to have their thoughts about things. I think that's a hard thing to swallow. That's one thing I'm really proud of my daughter for. She's 14. She's a middle school girl, 8th grade. And I mean, ever since she was little, if we would say, oh, Sophia, those socks, those socks don't really match that outfit. She's like, what is it, a sock contest? So, she like didn't care about what anyone else thought. I'm like, how freeing. And as I looked at through life through the eyes of my young lady daughter and watching her grow and the things that she's thought of and changed and grown, it's been a beautiful thing to help me think about them. So am I worried about having someone over to the house because it's a mess? Well, If they're the kind of person that's going to judge me really hard that my house isn't perfect, is that someone I really want to have as a friend? I don't know. So these people pleasing behaviors. Whew. And I love this quote. The truth is other people's opinions are none of your business. Now, it all seems great. I can say these things, but living it out is not as easy as we would like it to be. So there are some recommendations before you make a decision to set a boundary, some recommendations during the process, and some after taking action, like things you will do after you've set the boundary to kind of maintain that boundary. So before the decision, it is important to get clear on your truth. I've taught a lot of anger management classes, and I've learned to look at anger as a signal. Warning, warning, something needs attention. If you're getting angry all the time, what if when we calm down, we took a step back and looked at that anger? What's behind that anger? Typically, behind anger is fear or pain. So I got to get clear on my truth. What am I actually upset about? What is actually bothering me? And that sometimes takes a little reflection. Sometimes, if you have a good trusted friend or a therapist or a mentor or a coworker, that can sometimes clarify things for you. Great. Have those kinds of conversations. So get clear on your truth. What really is the issue? Prepare for reactions. So it's almost like I know I've thought about this as a parent. When I think, okay, I'm going to make some changes in this area in order to try to maybe help the bedtime routine go better. What are the loopholes? How could it go wrong? If I say this, if this is the consequence, what are the loopholes? How could this maybe work or how could it not work? So get prepared for people's reactions. And, think to yourself, all right, what's the worst thing they could say? I could handle that. Have a plan, line up supports. For a lot of us, we can't always make these big changes alone. So having that good, powerful, even if it's just one person, support is important. If you don't have any support in your life, 100% recommend a therapist or a life coach. Could be a really powerful thing. Plan your communication. What's the right time? How are you going to say it? Should it be in person or is in person too scary? I recently talked someone through a significant boundary they were having to set with an elderly parent. That elderly parent was very verbally abusive. And so as we kind of talked through it, and she's like, well, I feel like I should go talk to her in person. I said, okay. Well, if you talk to her in person, is that going to make you feel safe? Is there someone you can bring with you? Well, I don't know. I feel kind of bad to bring my husband. And the question I asked her, I said, if you were walking down a dark alley, would you feel bad about asking your husband to walk with you? Well, no. I said, well, this could also be emotionally dangerous. Having someone safe with you, that could give you an exit. So she planned the communication. She picked a good day of the week. She went with her husband and also had her exit plan if things didn't go well and prepared for reactions. There were reactions, but she said it was just so freeing to be like, it didn't, before that would have made me question whether or not what I was doing was okay, and setting this boundary, or not. But so plan that communication because a lot of times that face to face might be too much. It might be better through an email. And if you're worried about the email, then, have a trusted friend read it. So plan that communication. So that's before. Now, during the process, stay firm but kind. If I'm yelling my boundary, just my tone is going to put them in a state of fight or flight and they're not going to hear what we're saying. So stay firm but kind. Allow other people to have emotions without absorbing those emotions. If you start to feel like you're absorbing those emotions, you can say things like, I'm not sure how to respond to that. Let me get back with you. And you can leave if you need to. All right. So allow emotions without absorbing them. I can't control their reactions. They're allowed to have them. I don't have to absorb them. Keep your boundaries clear. So that's why it's important to get clear on your truth so that your boundaries remain clear. Focus on your why. Why are you doing this? Sometimes short-term pain prevents long-term suffering. And after taking action, that's the tricky part. Because people who are used to a system being a certain way, they're going to use every tool in their toolbox to get things back to the way it was before when maybe they liked you being, insecure and easily manipulated. So maintain your stance. Allow grieving because change, even positive change, can be difficult. While you might be making positive changes, other people might now be forced to change or stay the same, but they are, this might cause them pain. because you're having to make some really important changes. So allow time for you to grieve and for them to grieve. And the grief process is complicated. There's anger, denial, depression, acceptance. Allow time for grieving. Trust the process. There are no quick results with a lot of these things, and focused forward. Why am I doing this? What would my future look like if I continue to maintain this boundary? So that's some really good advice she offers in the book, before, during, and after taking action. And I think it's always good to revisit this. So just also know that the whole presentation will be emailed to you, so you can kind of look through these, or highly recommend reading the book. I'm also going to be emailing you a fantastic summary article, as well as some good Brene Brown articles on setting healthy boundaries. Because sometimes, like, how do I say it? All those things are important. So there's different places that we might need to set boundaries. So setting professional boundaries. So in the workplace, or, in those professional interactions, clear communication of limits. I've got to let people know what is okay and what is not okay. Consistent enforcements. So if in my professional environment, which for me is an elementary school, if I am kind of loosey-goosey on, sometimes I follow through on this when I've told a child not to do this, and sometimes I follow through the consequence, or sometimes I act like it's okay when it's really not okay. I've got to be consistent in maintaining those boundaries, or without realizing it, I'm training them to not really believe what I say. I can have a respectful delivery. And a lot of people think that you have to be aggressive to get what you want. I taught some anger management groups and really, really enjoyed that when I was doing in the anger management groups. There's aggressive communication, there is passive communication, and there's assertive communication. Aggressive communication means I don't care about anyone else's thoughts or feelings. This is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it however I want. That's not respectful, right? Passive communication is, kind of, well, maybe, I like kind of beat around and think they're going to beat around the bush and vaguely describe things. I'm not really clear. Be respectful, be assertive. Assertive means I can talk in a firm but kind voice, and I'm sharing my thoughts and my feelings, and I can also have respect for their thoughts and their feelings. Focus on your responsibilities. You are not responsible for their behavior. You are not responsible for their reaction. You are not responsible for their opinions of you. Focus on what you are responsible for, your actions, your thoughts, your behaviors, your work ethic, and maintain those professional relationships. So very important. And the hard thing too is, as adults, a lot of us, a really good place of forming friendships is through the work environment. In elementary school, and once all the way through high school, you are just inundated and surrounded constantly by kids your same age, often with common goals. Then you graduate high school, and maybe you go on to college, or you don't go on to college, or you go on to training, or you start a job. And a lot of those friends that you thought would be friends for life, they've gone kind of their own directions, and they have different goals at different times in life. Maybe they have kids, maybe they want to travel, whatever, and relationships can grow apart. So, it is a little more difficult if we are expecting friendships to come as easily as they did when we were kids. Sometimes it's a little harder as adults, and it just takes a little bit more time. Those are some good ideas for professional boundaries. Now, personal boundaries. First off, in a personal relationship, you've got to identify your non-negotiables. What are these are things that I cannot compromise on? Now, someone might be a little messy, okay? But is a non-negotiable that they're constantly dumping their laundry and leaving it all over, and expecting you to do that. That might be a non-negotiable. One thing I'm really proud of one of my sons for, he is such a clear communicator. It's hilarious. His older brothers actually look to him and be like, all right, you're the voice. You're going to say what you need to say. People at work would be like, okay, we need you to tell this to management because you seem to say it in a right way. But he identified as non-negotiables. And in his relationships, he just kind of lets them know, hey, it's okay if we're going to have conflict. I have no problem with conflict. I have no problem discussing, difficult things. There will be no name calling, and there will be no cussing while we are communicating about something difficult. Because if there's name calling and cussing, conversation is over, and I will not continue that conversation until we can talk in a respectful way. Here's a 23-year-old who's setting out, this is a non-negotiable for me. You're allowed to be angry, but while you're angry, if you're going to cuss me out and you're going to call me names, this conversation is to me. You can be angry, but this part's non-negotiable. So, communicating your expectations. Now, this tricky thing about expectations is they are linked to happiness. If our expectations are met, we feel happy. But there are some reasons why our expectations don't get met. Sometimes they're unreasonable. So we've got to make sure we have reasonable expectations. If I think someone is going to be perfect and just think I'm the most amazing person every day for the rest of my life, well, that's an unrealistic expectation. But if it isn't met, even though it's unrealistic, we legitimately feel unhappy. So I've got to make sure my expectations are realistic. Also, I have to communicate them because one thing that causes a lot of problems is unspoken expectations. And we use this phrase in our head, well, they should know. They should know. The human brain is not able to read other people's minds. They aren't. It can't. So there is no they should know. There is, did you tell them clearly? Okay. Respect other people's boundaries as well. I can have boundaries and they can have boundaries as well. And maintain those healthy distance from people who don't respect your boundaries. There are certain relationships that are obligations. There are certain family members that we continue to interact with. But how could I keep a healthy distance? If I've got a close family member that I wish that maybe they were supportive and motherly or whatever, and really empathetic, but they're not. Well, I can't get rid of them. You know, that might be a parent or that might be a sibling or that might be an aunt, but I'm not going to go to them when I'm needing empathy or advice. I'm going to maintain a healthy distance and maybe the relationship is a little more superficial, but that's okay if that's how it needs to be. Now, some relationships you might need to completely sever. But for a lot of us, we continue to think another person can meet needs or have the ability to meet those needs. And I remember once it was kind of told to me, I had a really frustrating interaction with a family member, and I was always disappointed and disappointed and disappointed. And in my codependency group, they said, okay, if someone didn't have arms, would you ask them to give you a hug? I'm like, no. And then they use the other person's name and they're like, they don't have arms. You keep wanting empathy and nurturing from them. They're not capable of doing that. They don't have arms. Change your expectations. Maintain those healthy distances. And I love this quote. Some friendships are meant for a season, some for a reason, some for a lifetime. These different personal relationships, you know, not all of them last forever. Okay. Now, there are some like techie things that she mentions in the book, this ABC loop for boundary setting. It's kind of got these 3 steps. So, first off, if there's a situation, typically we don't often know that we need to have a boundary until we're ticked off, like the boundary's already been crossed. We can predict certain boundaries. We can read and grow in our knowledge about like relationships and things like that and parenting or whatever it might be. But a lot of times we never realize there needed to be a boundary until it's already been crossed. So we have to acknowledge that situation. And then if that's been going on for a while, we've got to break the pattern. And in order to break the pattern, I then choose my response. All right. So if there's been an issue and I want to break this pattern, I have to choose how I'm going to respond to the behavior, what my boundary is going to sound like. When am I going to talk about this boundary? How am I going to be prepared for their emotional reaction to it? But it starts off by not ignoring things, you know, and to break a pattern, that's like rocking the boat. It takes some time. What's my response going to be? The day someone changes is the day they decide they're ready, not the day you decide they need to. Again, just because I'm setting a boundary doesn't mean I'm going to change their behavior. What it does mean is I'm going to set myself up with this boundary so that no matter what their behavior is, it will have less of an impact on me. So, very important. I cannot make someone change. It's the day they decide to do it. Okay. Now, what do I do in the inevitable time that someone has an emotional response to a boundary that I set? So, or I have an emotional response to an interaction. So, first off, we have to recognize our own emotional triggers. So, I have to be honest with myself and know what's a trigger for me, what's not a trigger for me. I have to allow space for feelings. We kind of live in a society where we don't want to feel the negative stuff. We only want to feel the positive stuff. And life is life. There's birth and there's death. I mean, there are certain schools of psychology, existentialism, I believe, I could be saying that incorrectly, that knowing that we're going to die gives meaning to life because it isn't forever. Like, how can I make the most of this time that I have? We have to recognize those emotional triggers and allow space for the uncomfortable feelings as well as the joyful feelings. We have to maintain our boundaries. Just because someone's upset about it and they don't like it or they have a really negative opinion about it doesn't mean the boundary shouldn't be there. And then when they do have an emotional response to a boundary I've set, I can choose how to respond to that. So sometimes also taking the time to understand someone else's frame of reference, like if I'm taking the time to see where they're coming from, that doesn't mean that I agree with them. A lot of times we think empathy equals agreement. No, I can see why they think that way. I get why they're having that response, but I don't have to agree and say that it's okay, you know. And that's, as a school counselor, I'm always trying to like juggle that, in that it's almost like a seesaw. So if with an understanding of a trauma informed approach to children and children's behavior, you know, that trauma informed approach is going to help me understand the why they might overreact in a situation, why they might, you know, be having negative interactions with peers, or why they might be struggling with defiance. It helps me understand the why. But it doesn't mean just because I understand the why and have empathy towards that real significant trauma they might have had, doesn't mean I just say that what they do is okay. I can understand the why, I can have an empathetic response, but I also love them enough to let them experience the consequences of their choices. Understanding the why doesn't excuse the what. All right. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them. So this I love. I love you know, her response to this. It's not your job to manage people's emotions. So let's see what the wise Mel has to say.
You're not responsible for managing other people's emotions. You got to let your mom be disappointed. You got to let your stepbrother be an instigator on politics. You're not responsible for parenting them. You are responsible for your emotions. You and I have spent years trying to change our family, managing them, feeling like it's your responsibility for your mom to be job to try to control, fix, or manage someone else's emotions. It's their job. You're going to use the let them theory to stop yourself from managing other people, fixing other people, engaging in the old dynamics. You're then going to say, let me, and you're going to focus on your part in it. How do I want to show up? What is it that I want to lean into, and what am I going to opt out of? And when you, how you show up, how you engage, what energy you bring, what conversations you initiate, which ones you participate in, which ones you don't, that is all in your control.
What's not in my control is how they cut off some of the good parts, but it kind of helps you. I'm not responsible for managing someone else's emotions. Now, I can, if I'm saying it in a respectful, you know, firm but kind way, that definitely might create the opportunity for an environment that might help with some of those emotions. But their feelings are their feelings. My feelings are my feelings. And we spend a lifetime, or you might be, you know, some people are labeled, they're the peacemaker. Sometimes the peacemakers are miserable because they're so busy feeling like they need to manage everybody that they don't acknowledge their own needs. It's also important to create those support systems because, you know, we want to build these reliable connections that when we have a need, we can go and we can talk and we can work things through. Establish those regular check-ins. Sometimes you might need to schedule it. Hey, Wednesday's the day I'm going to call my sister, or, you know, I'm doing these positive check-ins. Or there was another guy that I listened to, and he talked about, he said like the average amount of time that someone needs, I can't remember if he said it was 7 minutes or 11 minutes, that they need to actually feel like connected and supported if they're going through a tough time. And so he had a friend that texted him, and you know, and they said, how you doing? And he's like just responded, oh, doing fine. And then that friend didn't text for about a week or so. And then he kind of checked with the friend, and he's like, what's going on? You just haven't responded or anything. He goes, well, yeah, I did reach out to you last week. He goes, when did you reach out to me? And then it was, the reach out was, how you doing? What's going on? That wasn't like actually telling what they do. And he goes, I had no idea. I would have dropped everything to help you out. And so he's like, all right, let's have our new code be, hey, do you have 11 minutes? Or was it 7 minutes? It might have been 7 minutes. I can't remember. But that was their code. If they sent that text, do you have 7 minutes? That meant, hey, my friend really needs help right now. I'm going to give him that time. Even if it's not going to solve all the problems, that could be a good check-in. Share resources. And one of you was mentioning, Kate, you were mentioning how you love, hey, I've been through tough stuff. You want resources? Here you go, here you go, here you go. Share those resources. That creates this beautiful support network because you going through tough stuff creates this beautiful strength, the beauty from the ashes that you don't know what you don't know till you've been through something. And then that empathy, that vulnerability, that connection can be powerful as well as shared resources. That's another thing like Oklahoma Family Network does. It's like parent to parent. They're trying to connect you with other families that are in similar situations because I tell you what, families who've been through tough stuff know how to help other families who are going through tough stuff and maintain that consistency with those support systems. Sometimes as you're building a new support system, new friendships, love her quote, give it a year. The best friends of your life might be people you haven't even met yet. Just because you might not still have some of the friends you had, or you're in the process of rebuilding a new support system, doesn't mean that, it's never going to happen. Sometimes it just give it some time, give it a year. You might be surprised. All right, now what do I do when people violate my boundaries? Because just because you set the boundary does not mean they're going to honor the boundary. So first off, if they cross the line that you have said that you don't want to be crossed, address it immediately. When we ignore, we dismiss, we deny, we're literally training them that what I said doesn't matter. So immediately address that. Stay calm and clear. Restate the expectations that you originally stated with the boundary. And if you have to, follow through with the consequence. And that's the hard part. We don't want it to get to the consequence part. But here's the thing, and this is hard to wrap your mind around. And I love this quote. The most loving thing you can do is stop rescuing people from the pain that could finally motivate them to change. If I don't address things immediately, if I'm not calm and clear in restating my expectations, or I don't follow through with the consequence for them crossing the boundary, I'm literally allowing them to continue in the same dysfunctional habits. I'm not breaking that cycle. I'm rescuing them from their discomfort. Sometimes the only thing that ever causes us to change and grow is the discomfort when we have no other options. I look back at my life, the times where I have hurt the most and gone through the most difficult times, the times where I've had the most growth. The most loving thing you can do is stop rescuing people from the pain of them, their discomfort about your boundaries, because that might be the thing that actually leads them to change. Okay. So, how could you respond to a rude, manipulative kind of comment? I love this guy too, John Deloney. He is wonderful. I like him. I like Mel Robbins, but he has so many good nuggets. But he talks about how to respond to someone when they're having a negative emotional response to you. All right, here we go.
Biggest thing is you cannot walk on eggshells and be like, oh, let's not say that, please. Those kind of people will feed off of that. They'll try to lean to that even more. Instead, you need to stand exactly where you are instead of beginning your words with you. Like, you can't talk to me that way. It's, I don't accept that tone. You can't yell at me. I don't respond to that volume. Instead of beginning it with you, begin with I. Magical things can happen. You can figure out how to do that with almost every single phrase. Instead of beginning with you, beginning with I, because you can't control what they're saying. You can control their comment, but you can control yourself, beginning with I, and then you can quickly lay a boundary on that. I don't respond to those kind of comments.
Really powerful stuff. And Kate, I got your message. You have a good night when you get there. So glad you're able to join us. All right. Now, just a few more things. Digital boundaries. Set communication limits, manage your social media presence. I have found that the healthier I get with boundaries, the less and less I'm on social media. Control that work-life balance. Before, when you left work, no one could get a hold of you. Now, do you have to answer every phone call? Do you have to check your email? I mean, some people don't check their email. I didn't realize how I could limit that digital boundaries until I went to grad school. I was in the middle of my internship. Like I had to leave right after my school job to go and do my counseling internship job. I didn't have time to answer work emails, so I stopped answering them after hours. And it was so freeing. So when I was done with my internship and graduated, it was like, you know what? I'm going to maintain that boundary. I don't have to check my phone at all times to be constantly available. I love what one of my sons does for this. He has a work phone and he has a personal phone. He went on vacation, turned off the work phone. His manager called him on the personal phone and he said, hey, Colby, da, 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 da. And my son's like, I'm on vacation. I'm not available. And he's like, so I'm going to hang up now and I will not be responding to any phone calls because I'm on vacation. I'm like, what? But that's the right thing to do. Digital boundary. I'm not at work. Nope. You got to control that work-life balance, protect your personal time. Your influence grows in direct proportion to your ability to let go and control. All right. Financial boundaries. Woo, money can really destroy relationships. Have your clear monetary limits. All right. You've got to separate your personal and professional finances. You got to keep those boundaries clear. I shouldn't, and that's hard as a teacher, constantly buying stuff for the classroom when really it's not being, you got to set those personal, professional finances. Avoid enabling behaviors like constantly rushing in and rescuing people and bailing them out or things like that. I actually used to teach parenting classes in the jail, and we were talking about consequences and how valuable they are, even though we don't like them. And she talked about how her parents all along, anytime she made a mistake, time she got in trouble with the law, they'd immediately come and bail her out of jail, pay off her credit cards that she rang up. And they were trying to help her. And she said, I never had to experience the consequences of my choices. And here I am, 30 years old. Now I've got a federal drug charge. Um, and there's no way out of it. It's mandatory sentencing, and there's no one to rescue me from my choices. But it would have been maybe better for me if I'd had to experience those. Maintain that financial independence. You are not unconditional love does not mean I have to provide unconditional financial support. Um, Time management boundaries. Erin, we were talking about this before class started. Prioritize your commitments. Learn to say no. No can be a loving word. Schedule personal time. You might literally have to pencil it in. Nope, this is my time. This is what I'm doing. And respect others' people's time too. I don't make phone calls after certain times of night. I don't send text messages after certain times of night. If I continue to get text messages early in the morning before I'm awake or later, I will send a message and say, I typically sleep until this time. I would request that you do not send me messages before or after these hours. Thank you. I had to do that, especially with college students when I was working with college students. You don't have to ask permission for what you want. Okay. Now, what about health and wellness boundaries? You got to protect that personal space. Where can you keep a safe zone? Where is your place that you can go that's safe? Maintaining that work-life balance really, really helps with that health and wellness boundaries. I recently, last May, so it'll be a year this May, I was working towards my licensed professional counseling credentialing. I was a candidate for being licensed professional counseling, having to clock my hours and do all that. I was doing so much time on that in addition to working my school counseling job. I was completely burnt out and I had no time or energy for my family. So I stepped away from that because that was not work-life balance. All I did was work, 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 work. And for what? I only have 4 years left with my daughter. Is I going to lose all those years before she graduates high school? No, that was a difficult decision to do. Best thing I ever did. And I do miss working with my clients, but got to maintain that work-life balance. Prioritize self-care. Self-care is not optional. It's necessary. And provide support to others without enabling. It's not my job to fix their problems for them. I can offer support, but I can also say when I am and am not available for that. Supporting someone through their struggles requires the strength to let them also face their own battles. I don't have to fix it for them to still be supportive. Okay. Now, this particular video is pretty hit me pretty hard, but it's true. All right, let's see what she has to say.
One of my favorite quotes to share as a therapist is, I would rather adjust my life to their absence than adjust my boundaries to their disrespect.
That's deep. If I'm continually adjusting my life and my boundaries, when someone else is not disrespecting them, that's a lot of effort. For what? For what purpose? I would rather adjust to you not being in my life than keep moving my boundaries around to accommodate your disrespectful behavior. And that's a hard choice that sometimes we have to make. That's not an unloving choice because they're responsible for their actions and reactions. It's not unloving. Somehow we've gotten to this image that, well, if I really cared and if I really forgave, things would be okay. Relationship requires two things. It does require forgiveness, me choosing not to pay them back for what they owe. It also requires trust. Trust is you do what you say you're going to do over and over in a consistent way. Mistakes, okay, yep, you can make a mistake. I have to forgive them, and they have to take the time to rebuild trust. If someone continues to not build trust by constantly ignoring your boundaries, you can forgive them for that. That does not mean you have to have a relationship. To have a relationship with someone, forgiveness and trust. Now, here's the beautiful thing. You can grow through boundaries and embrace that personal growth when you're making these tough choices for yourself, when you're making these tough boundaries and really doing what you can do to create safe spaces for you in your interactions with others. Learn from your experiences. You're going to set boundaries and it's going to flop. Okay, how can I learn and grow through that? That's fine. Adjust as you need to. Sometimes we'll get so gung-ho about boundaries at first that we're like boundary for everything and almost overdoing it. So, adjust as you need. But the big thing is stay consistent. It's going to take time to get used to this. And every ending, like unhealthy ending, it makes space for a new beginning. It's not just a death. It's not just a loss. It can create opportunities for new growth because all that time I was spending with that really toxic relationship or that really toxic interaction pattern, I just freed up time to have for joyful things. So there are some common pitfalls to avoid. First off, you don't have to over explain your boundaries. They don't have to know all the details about why your boundary is your boundary. If you're inconsistent on enforcement, again, that's kind of like we're training them to not really, feel like they have to respect our boundaries. When we take responsibility for others' feelings, that can also make setting boundaries a struggle. Or if we're guilted into making decisions, that could be some common pitfalls. You can't want someone's feeling more than they do. So sometimes those are the tough choices. And here's how you know you're doing good with boundaries. When you feel empowered, when you have reduced stress, when you have better relationships and you have increased self-respect, that's a good sign we're doing good in the healthy boundaries department. The life you want to live is on the other side of letting go. Just love her quotes. All right, moving forward, what do we do? Your peace is a priority. It's not optional. It's a priority. And even in the most chaotic situations and seasons of life, I'm not saying that setting boundaries is going to be like remove all of the logistical things. I'm in a very difficult season right now with my elderly parents having some major health issues and major memory issues. And these are like life altering decisions and things that are having to be made. It's a crazy, crazy season right now. I can still have peace in this season if I'm setting those healthy boundaries and setting healthy boundaries for my self-care and my time management and those things. Peace is a priority. Boundaries create freedom. It's so weird. Like I'm putting up a fence. There's so much freedom by doing that. Growth requires acceptance. Acceptance of other people being upset with us. Acceptance of change. Acceptance of the fact that we've made mistakes and we're learning and growing. Growth requires acceptance, and your choices matter most. What you choose to do about situations, I mean, that 51% principle in any situation, you have 51% control. Your choices really do matter. This quote is it's really deep. You are the love of your life. While relationships may end, your relationship with yourself is lifelong. Make it a good one. Make it a good one. All right. I love a good way to sum it up. All right. If we start to apply these principles, really look at the let me, the let them theory, part of let them is also let me. So in your let me area, guess what you get to do? Get started. Take some risks. Be honest. Live authentically. Create those boundaries. Choose growth. Live the life you want. That's what you can do in your let me area. What this means is I stop waiting for permission from everyone in my life for me to do these things and to take care of myself. All right. I stop seeking everyone's approval about the choices I'm making. I stop making excuses for not bringing about healthy change. And I start living fully. Let this be your let me era. Right. And highly recommend reading the book. So I will also forward all the presentation and everything. Now, there are some great opportunities on the Oklahoma Family Network. So I'm actually going to pull up that page. Let's see. I believe that should be, Yep, that should be showing. If you go to the Oklahoma Family Network page, they have all sorts of events coming up, so you can always put things on your calendar. We won't be doing any of these particular classes like that I'm going to be teaching, I don't believe, over the summer, but we'll start again in the fall. So some exciting things there. And they have all sorts of stuff going on all the time that you might not be aware of. So I'm including that in our stuff. I'm also going to send you a couple of really good articles. One was a great summary of the let them theory. This kind of did a chapter by chapter breakdown, and another one on how to set boundaries with some good information about Brene Brown. And then I also included my contact information on there. So I'm Lauren Alvarez, and it has my email there, as well as my extension. You're always welcome to reach out. I might not check my email after work hours, but I will get to you. All right. So hopefully you learned something, and thank you so much for coming.